Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa with news from across the continent. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Coming up on the programme. Ethiopia gets more than 140 million euros lifeline, a support that had been suspended due to the conflict in the northern Tigray region. The money aims to rebuild key sectors, but the timing of the decision has raised questions. The war in Iran continues to send shockwaves through African economies, disrupting key sectors. Airlines are facing severe turmoil. Nigeria has seen a 300% surge in jet fuel prices, while Kenya has already appealed to the World Bank for emergency support. And final stop for Pope Leo XIV for a nation's visit to Africa. He's now in Equatorial Guinea, where he met with long-standing leader Theodore Obiang Nguema, whose government is regularly accused of authoritarianism and human rights abuses. The Tigray People's Liberation Front has reinstated a regional parliament, a move that initially helped spark the Tigray war. This decision worries observers who fear it could reignite the deadly conflict between the Ethiopian government and Tigray's forces. Meanwhile, the European Union has unfrozen more than 140 million euros for Ethiopia after a 5-year freeze over that same conflict. The cash will fund healthcare, agriculture and digital growth. But the timing of the decision has raised questions. More from our correspondent Tom Kennedy.
This funding was actually blocked in 2020 after the outbreak of the Tigray war between the TPLF and the federal government forces. That conflict officially ended in 2022 with the Pretoria Agreement, but the funding remained blocked because the EU demanded that humanitarian aid return to the war-torn region in the north of the country. But on Monday, the EU said that they had unblocked this funding and that it was a testament to their confidence in Ethiopia's reform agenda. Now, that's basically macroeconomic efforts that the government has made here towards market liberalisation, partly due to their ambitions to join the World Trade Organization. But what's so surprising about the timing of this unblocking of funding is that tensions between the TPLF and the federal government forces have never been so high since the end of the war. Last week, the TPLF refused Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's decision to extend the president of the interim administration in the region by another year, and the TPLF said that that was a breach of the Pretoria Agreement, and there have been fears of a renewed conflict in the region. On top of that, humanitarian aid has not properly reached Tigray since the end of the war. More than half of the schools there remain closed, and there are about 1 million people living in camps for internally displaced people that are in dire need of aid.
The ongoing conflict in Iran is reverberating across African economies, disrupting key sectors. In Nigeria, the cost of jet fuel has surged by 300%, creating severe challenges for domestic airlines. The aviation minister has urged airlines to avoid increasing airfares for passengers and refrain from suspending flight operations despite the financial strain. But the situation is already critical. Some airlines have been forced to shut down operations. Emily Ball has more details.
As the crisis in the Middle East continues, its turbulence is felt around the world, not least here at Nigeria's Lagos International Airport, where a 270% surge in jet fuel prices since February has upended the industry.
The product has become less available, and when the supply goes down, the price goes up. If you are transporting your Jet A1, your aviation fuel, you take it to the airports by road. Because of the higher cost of diesel, the cost of transportation has gone up by 50%. So that's the first addition to the cost.
Over the weekend, Nigerian airlines temporarily suspended a nationwide shutdown of flight operations after a government appeal. More talks are expected to take place on Wednesday in the hopes of finding a solution.
Essentially, what will happen is they will continue to have a discussion with those that manage their industry, and they will find temporary solutions while waiting for the bigger problem to resolve itself.
Nigerian airlines are particularly vulnerable to increasing prices, since fuel typically accounts for over a third of their expenses. According to local authorities, the Nigerian aviation industry consumes around 2.1 million litres of jet fuel per day and transports over 10 million passengers every year.
And Kenya is also feeling the brunt. Nairobi is warning of possible jet fuel shortages and has turned to the World Bank for emergency support, as global energy disruptions expose the vulnerability of African economies heavily dependent on imported fuels. Debates are now intensifying around alternative solutions, from solar power to nuclear energy. So to discuss this, we are joined by Tony Tiyu, a renewable energy expert. Welcome, Tony. Great to see you as usual. So first question, so is that what we're seeing in Kenya and Nigeria, Kenya having to turn to the World Bank, a warning sign for the rest of the continent?
Yes, I would very much say that it's a warning sign for the rest of the continent because it shows how exposed many African economies are to the imported fuel and also global shocks. So I was in Kenya last week and I'm in Dar es Salaam right now in Tanzania. And what is striking is how quickly geopolitical tension turned into local economic pain. So in Kenya, I saw fuel prices jump by almost 20% overnight. And that immediately hit border riders. These are small transport operators, informal workers, because these are people whose margins are already tight. So when fuel rises, so the effect are spread across the economy. So transport costs, food prices, logistic, inflation pressure all rises. So Africa is not often the cause of this crisis, but one of the regions that pays them most directly. This is why this moment is important. It shows that energy in Africa is not only a climate issue, it is very much becoming an economic resilience issue.
So, Tony, what about alternative solutions? Today, only about 4% of Africa's energy comes from solar. So is that number going to shift?
I do believe that the picture is starting to shift in a meaningful way. So the exact number will depend on the methodology. So the Global Solar Council, for example, give a more conservative view, while AFSIA argue that lots of solar in Africa, especially commercial, industrial, and rooftop solar, is undercounted. But both point to the same direction. So solar demand is growing and Africa is becoming a much more serious solar market. And this explains also the role of China, because China exports are not just arriving by chances, they are responding to a real demand on the ground. So Africa needs cheaper, faster, modular power, and solar is increasingly answering this need. So China is helping to accelerate the transition, but the real driver is African reality. So high diesel costs, weak grid, and the need for more energy autonomy. That's what I would say.
So is there a risk of, for example, of replacing fuel dependency with technological dependency?
Well, in all fairness, I would say yes, there is a potential risk there, but the answer is certainly not less solar. The answer to me, it's more African ownership. So more local skills, more assembly, and more financing capacity, which will lead us to more industrial participation. That's what we need to be looking at instead of maybe worrying too much about the risk of technology dependencies.
What about nuclear energy on the continent? Are we now seeing some kind of renewed interest in nuclear energy across Africa?
There is certainly a renewed interest. However, I mean, at the opposition of some people, I would not frame it as, for example, nuclear versus solar. So solar and storage are the tools that Africa can deploy right now at speed and at scale, while nuclear is a long-term strategic option for actually a smaller number of countries with the right institutional but also financial capacity. So my view is very simple: address today's crisis with renewables, while some countries can prepare for longer-term options like nuclear. So overall, this could be a turning point because the crisis is exposing the cost of fossil fuel dependence, but also accelerating a more resilient future where we will see Africa build energy systems that are cleaner, more decentralized, and for me, much more economically sovereign.
And I know you've been traveling these past few weeks across Africa. Do you see that shift happening because of this crisis?
I do see the shift becoming much more, I would say, relevant. because people could see how exposed they are to the fuel prices hike, I would say, and how it impacts the economy. And they're now having a second thought. I'll take, for example, the e-mobility sectors, where most of the motor taxi will actually work with what we call ICE bike, which is functioning with fossil fuel. They now start looking at EV bikes, because it's a much more economically viable option for them. So when crisis like that hits, like I say, it makes them have second thought. And I've seen on the ground where the actual demand for EVs has been skyrocketing.
Thank you very much, Tony, to you as usual. Thank you very much for your expert opinion.
Thank you.
Now, Pope Leo has arrived in Equatorial Guinea for the final leg of his African tour. He follows in the footsteps of John Paul II, who 40 years ago became the first pope to visit the country of 2 million people, 80% of whom are Catholic. Throughout his African tour, the pontiff has criticized tyranny and exploitation while promoting peace. In Equatorial Guinea, he will be hosted by a government regularly accused of authoritarianism and human rights abuses. Emerald Maxwell.
For the fourth and final leg of his tour of Africa, Pope Leo was met by joyful Equatorial Guineans. He's the first pope to visit the largely Catholic country, a former Spanish colony on Africa's western coast, since John Paul II in 1982. Leo has to strike a delicate balance in Equatorial Guinea, supporting the faithful without backing the regime, which is regularly accused of authoritarianism, human rights violations, and corruption. Addressing political leaders, the US-born pontiff voiced regret at the widening gap between the wealthy 1% of the population living off vast oil revenues and the rest of the country, most of whom live in poverty.
One of the main drivers of the spread of armed conflicts is the colonization of oil and mineral deposits. Without regard for international law or the right of peoples to self-determination.
On the flight to Equatorial Guinea Tuesday, Pope Leo also took a moment to pay his respects to his predecessor Francis on the anniversary of his death last year, remembering the Argentinian pontiff as someone who gave the church so much with his words and his witness.
And back here in Paris, a powerful tribute celebrates one of the most influential figures in Congolese painting. Chéri Chérin, who passed away just a few months ago, leaves behind a vibrant and socially engaged body of work. A voice of the people and a keen observer of his time, he played a key role in bringing Congolese popular art to an international audience. Awa Diouf and Anaïs Chenel.
What I am today, I owe it to Chéri Chérin. I learned from him how to compose paintings, how to bring them to life. He really trained us well.
When he was around, there was a cheerful atmosphere. There was joy. That's why, in all his paintings, there's always a message of joy, of cheerfulness, a message of love. Chéri Chérin has had a truly great impact. It's also very important to pay tributes to him. His name really meant something.
And a bit of sports, and congratulations to the two Kenyans who won the Boston Marathon. John Korir set a new course record of 2 hours, 1 minute and 52 seconds to secure a second successive Boston Marathon victory. He shaved 1 minute and 10 seconds off the previous course record set by Kenyans Geoffrey Mutai in 2011. His compatriot Sharon Lokedi also successfully defended her title in a women's race, finishing in 2 hours, 18 minutes and 51 seconds. However, she did not break her own course record of 2 hours, 17 minutes and 22 seconds, which she set last year. And that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching.